Welcome to this live stream from Windows on the World, windowsontheworld.net. We do a news usually every Monday now, 8 p.m. UK time. But last week and this week, when I've been ready to put the shows out on Monday night, I've actually found a lot more information. And therefore, I've done another day's research, putting things together, which is what I've done here, because these shows are going to be in the archive forever. And as long as the channel doesn't get taken down and we don't get community strikes as much as we used to, because we're covering ancient history these days. And the thing is that the amount of information that's in the shows already is an archive within itself. So do go back and have a look, because we're going to be going into subjects that we have covered before, but not in the same way. And in this particular show, we're going to be looking at how the Sabbatean Frankists were part of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits, and how this movement actually spread in Ireland and Scotland through Kabbalistic Freemasonry. And the reason I'm doing this show tonight, and I didn't do it last night, is because I found some amazing documents on Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which tied in really perfectly with this show. So what I'm going to do is, with this show, if we can get onto that, we will, but otherwise it will be another show. And I might even do another one this week, because this stuff is so fascinating. And I know that the people who send me information and listen really appreciate it. So I'm always here to do my best and find the best information I can. A couple of articles that you might find of interest are Holy Sin of False Messiah, and the article called Clowns of Kabbalah. Clowns of Kabbalah actually gives links to Jacob Frank and Sabbatai Zevi, the leaders of the Sabbatean Frankists, and also the background to the Kabbalistic nature of this movement. So we did a show called Ava Frank, the Fake Royal Messiah. Now, Ava Frank was actually Jacob Frank's daughter, and she is a very big part of the picture, because she was proclaimed the Messiah, just as her father had proclaimed himself the Messiah, as being the reincarnation of the previous Messiah, self-proclaimed Sabbatai Zevi. So these people all had messianic complexes, hugely egotistical. And yes, the daughter of Jacob Frank actually became this incarnation of the Virgin Mary. I mean, it's quite absurd when we look at it in retrospect, but people really believed this at the time. And there are still people who are Frankists who actually still do. So yes, the whole thing about Sabbatean Frankism is redemption through sin. In other words, the Messiah will come if we create enough chaos. And then before we start and get into the information properly, I'm going to give you the opening of a prayer. And I'm going to wonder and ask if you can decode who they're talking about. Here we go. He is the true God and the King of the universe, our true Messiah, aside from whom there is no other God, neither above nor below or in the four directions of the world. Therefore we bow, prostrate ourselves, praise, revere, sanctify, make our King, and extol the name of the great, guess who? Sabbatai Zevi, who lived 1636 to 1676, and he was born in Izmir, which was in those days called Smyrna in modern day Turkey. And he was also in Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki was a massive influence for the people who were into the Sabbatean Frankist movement. And I believe there is still a section of people who are Frankists who are still in Thessaloniki. But Sabbatai Zevi was born in Izmir, which is now a tourist kind of place in Turkey. And it was in those days called Smyrna. He was actually banned from his own hometown. He got banned from many places. And in the end, Sabbatai Zevi was given a choice by the Sultan. Either you convert to Islam or we'll execute you. So he converted to Islam, and his followers converted to Islam too, and they became known as the Don May, and they were involved in the Young Turks uprising. They are still involved in parts of Saudi Arabia and across the Middle East today, and indeed Turkey. And if you look at an article called The Smart Cabal at windowsontheworld.net, you'll have the updated view of how the Sabbateans are still influencing the Middle East. So Sabbatai Zevi died in, when was it? Hang on. Was it this 1676 in Montenegro, and his tomb is in Montenegro. He was a self-described Messiah, and later Jacob Frank described himself as the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. And his movement, the Frankist movement, which moved over into Poland, into Podolia, there was a lot of Frankists all through Poland, especially in the Galicia area of Poland, which is now modern day Ukraine. So yes, they were known in Podolia and the surrounding cities as the double-edged sword, or the Cherev Pipio. In Poland by the late 1700s, here's a quote from what rabbis told people to do about the Frankists. Every person is required to search them out and expose their evil deeds, because they were called back in the day, the wife-swapping Jews of Thessaloniki, or Salonika as it was then, because they got involved in all sorts of unruly behavior. And it seems almost as though they didn't really care who knew about it, because it was this redemption through sin. And this happened to Sabbatai Zevi. He was actually really borderline insane, as was Jacob Frank. Maybe they were completely insane, but certainly I believe they became possessed by demons through this Kabbalistic magic which they indulged in. So yes, the crypto Muslims who converted were called the Don May, but later the crypto Muslims of the Don May, who were the Sabbateans, were converted to Catholicism. And many of them went to Ireland, and some of them became priests in both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, and many were involved in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, because the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry is a Kabbalistic order. And of course, the Sabbateans were Kabbalists who studied the Zohar, which is also known as the Book of Splendor, written around the 12th century. But as with most stuff which is relating to these Judaic cults, the people involved in it, these self-proclaimed messiahs, actually made it up as they went along. So with the Zohar, this was written by Moses de Leon, and who actually changed his name, Simeon ben Yochai. And he was the author of the Zohar, which is based on Genesis and a lot of fantasy. But it's very, very complicated, and it gives the background to what the Kabbalists are in, well, they're into to this day, because the Hasidim movement, which was in Russia in the late 1800s, was very influenced by the Kabbalah. So the Hasidim, who are the Orthodox branch of Judaism, are very much interested in Kabbalah. And in Thessaloniki, there's a huge Chabad Lubavitch center, which I inadvertently walked into. I was trying to post a parcel to England, and I asked somebody where the parcel place was, because it was over the road, and I'd walked into a massive Lubavitch center completely inadvertently. So very strong presence there in Thessaloniki, with both the Hasidim, the Chabad Lubavitch, and also with the modern day Frankist movement, because there are still Sabbatean Frankists to this day. And as Sabbatean Frankists, of course, have been hiding within Islam as the Don May, and also hiding within the Catholic Church. So yes, do have a look at Holy Sin of False Messiah and the article Clowns of Kabbalah. So yes, also Ava Frank, the Fake Royal Messiah. They're all on YouTube, actually. Ava Frank, the Fake Royal Messiah, is all about what happened to her and her father in Poland, and how in the end the cult was in a castle in Częstochowa. And the interesting thing is that Ava Frank actually died in Bulgaria on the border of Romania. And so Eastern Europe was a very big stronghold for the Sabbateans as they swept across. And it's very interesting because some of the revolutions that happened, we have to ask ourselves in the 1800s, were the Don May, the crypto Muslims, the Sabbateans, were they involved with their lodges throughout Central Eastern Europe? And I think there's a very strong possibility that they were. So yes, the article, The Messiah of Israel, look at an article called The Messiah of Israel, and it will give you some information as to the Sabbatean influence on the formation of modern day Israel. Indeed, it was Jacob Frank's great-great-grandson, Rabbi Kalisha, who wrote to Edmund de Rothschild. He wrote this hilarious groveling letter to Rothschild. Rothschild must be going, okay, I'll give you the money, just stop groveling. It's very, very funny, the letter to him. It's in that article, The Messiah of Israel, because Rabbi Kalisha was the person who put this into motion in a way with the Rothschilds, so that they would bankroll what would become the modern day Israel, the home for Jews in Palestine of the Balfour Declaration. So this is very, very important of the times to compare the formation of Israel to what is going on now, because I think we're seeing with Israel the inevitable outcome of what was going to happen there in the first place from 1948 onwards. So yes, the Sabbatean Frankists, Catholic Church, and the Jesuits. The Jesuits were also involved in this, Freemasons, and of course, the Rosicrucians, because they were very influenced by Kabbalah. In fact, when we look at the Fama Fraternitatis, their founding document from 1610 or around 1614, when they really got going, we will see that it is a Kabbalistic document, allegorical, waffling, and based on the similar principles of the wandering Sabbateans, the Don May. Father R.C. could have easily been Jacob Frank or Sabbatai Zevi, even though he's presented, of course, as this very Christian figure. So here we have the Christian Kabbalah, and that's something we'll also be covering as we go along. So we have to remember that the Don May, who swept through Turkey into Eastern Europe and Poland, and modern day Ukraine, were followers of Sabbatai Zevi, later Jacob Frank, and were outwardly Muslims, but inwardly Sabbateans. So the early Scottish Freemasons were actually, we found out recently, a development of what is called the Nisterim, which was made up of 36 Kabbalah leaders, people who made up the Nisterim. They were this elite group. And I've just found fascinating connections between them and the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which I will be putting into a show. And they, along with the Templar movements in Scotland, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the Kabbalists work very closely together. So when we look at Templar Freemasonry, we are also looking at something very influenced by Kabbalah and Rosicrucianism. They all cross over into sects such as the Martinists, who were very influential in the French Revolution, and the later Ellis Cohen, or the Elected Priesthood of the Universe. You can see a show called the Elected Priesthood of the Universe. Just look it up, either on windowsontheworld.net or on YouTube channel. And also the Rosicrucian mystery. And mystery is in inverted commas because there's no real mystery there. They just created one. So yes, Kabbalistic Freemasons were mainly Jacobites and pro-Catholic, and the main area of Podolia in Poland was the home of the followers of Sabbatai Zevi and later Jacob Frank. And after the death of Zevi in 1676, there was a belief amongst his followers, which is very important to the background of Sabbateanism. And the belief was that the soul of the Messiah, that's Sabbatai Zevi, the self-referencing Messiah, of course, was imprisoned in husks. Basically, it's a Kabbalistic thing where you are in a lower dimension and you get released, as is Sophia. it goes into Gnostic belief. But of course, the Kabbalah came out of the overheated brains of people in the Languedoc in the 12 and 1300s. It's incredibly hard work and pretty much a waste of time because it doesn't really lead you anywhere, in my opinion. And the best author to look at on the works of the Kabbalists is Gershon Sholem, who was an Israeli academic. And his stuff is very thorough. He's got the times, dates, the places, and the names in there. Very good if you want to really go into Kabbalah and what it's really about, and the Sabbatean Frankists. He did some brilliant essays on that because he had the background and the detail that is actually very difficult to find. So he's a very good reference. Yes. So the belief was that the Messiah was still imprisoned in these husks and he would be reborn and reappear as the Redeemer of Israel. And this was spread among all his followers. So if you believed in biblical Israel, then you could be a follower of this Messiah. So he had every angle covered, really. They were quite clever, these people. But I would say both Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank were quite sociopathic, psychopathic, possibly, but very charismatic when they wanted to be. In the case of Zevi, he was what would be called now bipolar, in that he would get into this fervor and go for days on end, and people would follow him, and then they wouldn't see him for weeks. And he would turn up after a few weeks and said, "Oh, I've been in deep meditation." He'd actually been asleep because he was exhausted. And you see these characteristics in Jacob Frank. So this complex, this messianic complex, is it demonically induced, or is it the personality to start with that starts to drive it? And do they then become possessed? Because there's no doubt in my mind that both of these characters had a kind of possession when you read about their things they got up to. We're going to tell you a bit about Jacob Frank and what he got up to, but Sabbatai Zevi was pushing around Torah scrolls in a pram and shouting at the top of his voice. He got banned from many, many places. And Jacob Frank did similar things in synagogues, and we're going to get onto that. And the behavior was so outrageous that, of course, the people who would openly call themselves Jews could have nothing to do with them. So they would have to convert to be part of it. But the other thing about the Sabbateans was that they were very enticing. I suppose a little bit like the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints. They say, we're from the Church of Jesus Christ. And then you find out they're called the Latter-day Saints, and they're not from the Church of Jesus Christ. They're followers of a Freemason, basically. Joseph Smith, who had a vision. It always starts with a vision, this messianic complex. And it did with both Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank as well. So they were also followed by this character called Yacado Credo. And this was when they created this sect called the Don May that blended Islam with the faith of the messiahship of Sabbatai Zevi. And the ideologues of Sabbateanism were many. There were many followers. They were almost like an underground network who had representatives in all these different areas. But a very famous one was Michael Abraham Cardoso, who died in 1680. He was a Marrano Jew who became an enthusiastic Sabbatean, and he wandered through various lands and preached that Israel should wait for the deeds of Sabbatai Zevi, about whom Isaiah had prophesied. And Zevi was referred to as being counted among the sinners, Isaiah 53. So they used and subverted bits of the Bible for their own ends. So I hope you can all hear me out there. And great, yes, good stuff. We're live and it's all working. That's great. I have to check because we had a few problems here with the sound, but it seems to be okay this week from what people are saying in the chat. So therefore, the Sabbateans must become converts like their Messiah. The Sabbateans permitted themselves to act in and engage in acts of lewdness and saw this as deeds of holiness, again, redemption through sin. And this would hasten the coming of the Messiah, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it, because if Sabbatai Zevi had already proclaimed himself the Messiah, how could it hasten the Messiah? I think they're talking about another Messiah. So yes, this messianic cult, it's very interesting actually, because they all work in very similar ways. And the Sabbatean Frankists work in a very similar way to Jehovah's Witnesses, to other cults. They wind people in, and then before you know it, you're doing a lot of dirty work for them and basically being in hierarchical structure. And that was a little bit like what happened with this, because of course they had these underground networks, and the open networks would have been called the Kahila among Jews, but they had their own Kahila, which would be rejected by most Jews. So this is an interesting thing. So you've got people who were purporting to be Muslims who were actually Jews, but they were Sabbateans. And a lot of the regular Jews didn't like them. So there was a lot of this infighting going on. A little bit similar to what happened, I suppose, between the Protestants and the Catholics, an induced kind of rivalry. And with the Sabbateans, their real success was that they were an underground cult movement. And they would outwardly masquerade as something they were not. The inner person would not convert. They would become a Muslim on the outside, but a Sabbatean on the inside, or a Catholic on the outside, Sabbatean on the inside. So the contact with the Jews of Turkey, most of whom were Sabbateans or Donmei, assisted this spread of Sabbateanism through Ashkenazic Jewry of Podolia. So I'm giving you some notes here to keep me on track, which are taken from an article which I'll give you at the end of the show. It's actually quite interesting because it had some information that I hadn't seen before. So yeah, Jacob Frank was born in 1726 in Galicia, Poland, which is now Ukraine, died in 1791, and he claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. The Catholic Church at the same time was looking for this new movement. It was a renewal of the Catholic Church, and it coincided with this Mary cult, which was really fascinating, which is how we get the cult of Mary in Ireland. It came through the Sabbateans. So the Catholic Church saw them as a way of converting into Catholics. Say they saw the Sabbateans as great opportunity for them to recruit them into the Catholic Church. And the Jesuits were also very keen to recruit the Sabbateans. It's because they could act as cryptos, having this inner and outer belief system, all based on the Zohar, but not incompatible with a lot of the tenets of the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, Jacob Frank was said to have attended a Catholic Mass and believed in the Eucharist. And he said, I even saw the miracle of the Eucharist in front of me. So he was either prone to delusions or he was high on his own belief system. Very interesting. And Jacob Frank was excommunicated, as had been Sabbatai Zevi, in cities where he and his followers gathered. And he in turn actually made allegations against Jews who had badmouthed him. So he libeled anybody who attacked him. So he was quite, I would say, had a very nasty side to him. But he could be very, very charming when he wanted to be. Same as Sabbatai Zevi. I think Zevi comes across as a little more uncontrolled and in a way a little less psychopathic than Jacob Frank, but that's just an assumption that I've made by what I've read. So yes, the Kabbalists were the storytellers really of Frankism, and the Christian Kabbalah then became involved. This is very, very important because this is where Christianity unfortunately got involved with the Kabbalah. So we had the book, The Christian Kabbalah by Johannes Reuchlin, which who lived 1455 to 1522. So this was kind of predating the messianic fervor of the Donmei and the Sabbateans. And then we had the Kabbalah unveiled by MacGregor Mathers, who lived 1854 to 1918. And Mathers was a Freemason and Rosicrucian, also a founding member of the Golden Dawn. And probably quite interesting. I think some of these people were fascinated by what was being put in front of them. They were looking for something. So they got kind of hooked into it. In a way, I would say, possibly hoodwinked into this Kabbalist cult. all very much taken in by it. Because, of course, if they were into Freemasonry and the Scottish Rite is purely Kabbalistic, then they would be initiated into this. And MacGregor Mathers was a Freemason, so he would have already been initiated into Kabbalistic Freemasonic Scottish Rite with its 33 degrees, and allegedly some higher ones too. So yes, storytellers. They were very good storytellers, a messianic cult with cult leaders, and they were bringing about enough chaos to force the return of the Messiah. Now, here we get on to how the Mary cult happened. It was a Vatican, Sabbatean, and messianic Jewish plot to take the attention off Jesus and put it onto a female figure, because this would then align with the Jewish, Kabbalistic, and Sabbatean Shekinah, the divine female energy. So they used Mary as the Shekinah. So the descendants of Jacob Frank and Sabbatai Zevi are still in Ireland to this day. The Jesuits, the Vatican, and the Kabbalists, Sabbatean Frankists all worked together on this project. And a lot of this started with somebody called Alphonse Ratisbonne, the Ratisbonne brothers. They were very, very well connected. And in 1842, Alphonse had a vision of Mary on a trip to Rome, and he became a Roman Catholic. And Mary then became, through the influence of Ratisbonne and the Sabbateans, Mary became the Zohar Sabbatean, the Miriam HaKadosha, the moon of Israel. So the Virgin Mary in this cult became the moon of Israel. So in other words, the Virgin Mary on the outside was Christian, but she was actually the incarnation of the Shekinah, Miriam HaKadosha, who was ruled by the moon and known as the moon of Israel. So yes, they then refer to Genesis 1:13 and Zohar 134a as a way of connecting Mary to Miriam HaKadosha. And they do that through those passages in the Bible and Zohar. And the Catholic Church officially started their Marian age in 1854. So this is not a coincidence, because if we look back, Alphonse Ratisbonne had his vision in 1842, and it really started taking off. But by 1854, the Catholic Church officially started the Marian age, that Mary was immaculately conceived. This was the Frankist viewpoint, that Jews would be integrated or ingrafted, as they called it, into the Roman Catholic Church. And most of them would do it willingly, so they wouldn't have to threaten people with pain of death or execution. They would willingly go into the cult of the Roman Church through the cult of the Sabbatean Frankists. So these people had no shame. That's the Vatican, and the Jesuits. They were just a recruiting agency for new followers and new agents. So Jews were converted by a miracle. Jews would be converted en masse by this miracle that would happen in this Marian age, and then there would come a Messianic age. So this was all from the overheated brains of a few people, which spread out all over Europe and into Ireland, Scotland, and England, of course, through the Kabbalah. So yes, to be Catholics without ceasing to be Jews, Catholics and Jews would bring the divine Shekinah through Mary onto earth as Miriam HaKadosha. So this is a hijacking of everything that is truly Christian. It's a perversion of everything that's truly Christian, and it was done with the complicity of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits. And in Ireland, this Mary cult became massive. as people in Ireland will know to this day. And of course, it led to the popularization of Lourdes and these visions that happened in the 1800s and the 1900s, these visions of the Virgin Mary. And yes, so a key player now we're going to get onto in this conversion role was Joseph Wolf, who was born in Bavaria in 1795, the son of Rabbi David Wolf, who was a descendant of Sabbatai Zevi. These people had huge networks, and I've been tracking them over the last couple of days because I knew about some. So for instance, the name Moran, which you get quite a lot in Ireland, that's Morano. It's a Jewish name. It's nothing to do with Ireland. And they all adopted names which were friendly to the place where they were in at the time. So they would have adopted Irish names. Cohen would become Cowan, etc. We covered that in some of those shows. Go back and listen to them. Very interesting. So yes, Joseph Wolf, son of Rabbi David Wolf, the descendant of Sabbatai Zevi, whose mother was Sarah Lipshevitz, and she was a Sabbatean Frankist and the granddaughter of Jacob Frank. Keep it in the family. She was an Orthodox Jew who became a Hebrew Catholic. So we had this new term, Hebrew Catholics, the Hebrew Christian evangelists of today, the Christian Zionists. It's all the same process of taking people out of a real belief system, which is very simple, and putting them in to a system of governance and management. So yes, so Wolf, Joseph Wolf, he became an Anglican priest. So the Sabbateans, they're into the Church of England. Joseph Wolf was Jesuit educated, but he was financed by the Sabbatean Frankists. Frankists supported by Cardinal York, Henry Stuart, and the Jesuits. So we also have the Jacobites who were openly sympathetic with the Kabbalists and the Sabbatean Frankists. Another interesting point there. So in 1812, Joseph Wolf was baptized as a Catholic. The Frankists, in turn, were secretly supported by Cardinal York, Henry Stuart, and the Jesuits. The Jesuits were fully in support. But in 1812, with the encouragement of the Frankists, Joseph was baptized as a Catholic at the age of 17. He then went to Rome to further his studies. So Joseph Wolf was a Jewish wonder child. And through his father, he was descended from Sabbatai Zevi. And Zevi, ZVI, is wolf, and TZVI is deer. So Sabbatai Zevi's followers saw him in a messianic light as the Sabbath deer, and his enemies called him the wolf of Saturn. That was Sabbatai Zevi. So lots of allegory in this. And you can see where the Rosicrucians got all this stuff from, especially if you read the later Rosicrucian document, which was Johann Valentinus, I think, called The Alchemical Wedding. It's a purely Kabbalistic document. It's based on Kabbalism. It's based on Zoharic stories of going through the emanations of rising up and ascending and being able to see what they call the divine household and be together with Ezekiel in the chariot. I mean, all this stuff is so far out that when you look at the basics of what Christianity was about, it's like some weird science fiction cult, which is actually a very good way of describing it. So yes, the Nistaram, the hidden ones, the secret society, was actually formed by Elijah Baal Shem. The Baal Shem, or the Baal Shem Tov, is a kind of self-appointed mystic who can heal people, bring about magical feats. We covered Samuel Falk, the self-titled Baal Shem Tov of London. He's actually buried in East London. I think he's buried in the Jewish cemetery, Bethnal Green. And he was an amazingly flamboyant character, but people took him really seriously. He would perform magical feats. He was said to have a menorah which burned constantly without any fuel. So he had these flames in this oil, but it would never be replenished. Of course, he was Probably a bit of a con man, but he did know a lot about the Kabbalah. So there's so many of these people that people these days, they don't know about. But they were, at the time, they were hugely influential, not just with the Jewish community, but of course with the underground Sabbatean movement. So yes, Rabbi Elijah Baal Shem was born in Krakow in Poland in 1537, and he formed the Nistarim, this secret society, the hidden ones. That's what the Nistarim are, the hidden ones. And there was 36 of them, all Kabbalistic. All the numbers refer to the Kabbalistic doctrines. The Nistarim, and this was to preserve the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Abulafia and the Zohar, the divine work of the Zohar, Moses de Leon, written in the 12th century, said to be referenced from 200 AD, but written in the 1200s in the Languedoc, and very promoted by someone called Nathan of Gaza at the time, who was another Kabbalist. And I don't think Nathan of Gaza was from Gaza. But some of them did actually move to Israel. Modern day Israel, Palestine as it was then, of course. So yes, his story, the Rabbi Elijah Baal Shem, his story is very similar to the fictional Christian Rosencreutz, or Father R.C. of the Rosicrucians. In other words, they have these mystical characters who travel, they wander, they travel through countries, they try and enlighten people. And there's a romanticizing of this all through Kabbalah and through the Sabbatean cult, which is where the Rosicrucians really came from. And the Rosicrucians still going today, of course, and incorporated into Templar Freemasonry, into the Hospitallers, and into very respectable parts of society, like the Knights of Malta, if you think that's respectable. Well, we think we're Tony Blair's a Knight of Malta. That's all you need to know, isn't it? But this rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Elijah, is said to have attained the experience of Ruach HaKadosh, the Holy Spirit. I wonder where they got that from. And through the experience, he received the healing power through the name of Masiach ben Joseph, the Messiah, son of Joseph. So they were all illumined through their own minds in a way. This is something that they have in common with really each other. So we've got this Nistarim, and run by this Baal Shem Tov, and he taught the idea that Masiach ben Joseph is present spiritually in every generation. It's a little bit like a copy of the Holy Spirit, really, but it's so out there and so egotistical through people like Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank that people who are rational, in my view, wouldn't take it too seriously. But I can see why it was popular at the time, because these people were charismatic. They drew people to them. People were looking for something. So yes, same concept as the Holy Spirit. So Rabbi Joel Baal Shem Tov took over after the death of Rabbi Elijah. And guess what? Keep it in the family again. Rabbi Joel Baal Shem Tov, which is basically self-appointed mystic, was the secret son of Sabbatai Zevi, or a secret son of Sabbatai Zevi. So from this arose a Puritan group in England called the Adamites. So they were directly from the cult of Sabbateanism. And the Adamites were this cult, and what they would do, they would be naked in their rituals, and they meditated completely nude. And some of their followers went naked in public. And apparently, there's a fella up in Scotland, Wilson, his name was, and I've covered him in a previous show. It's in one of those shows. He was a big part of the Adamites. And the Adamites, if they were confronted in the street, they were non-violent. So what they would do, they would just strip off. So if someone wanted to fight with one of them, they'd just take their clothes off. I mean, completely out there stuff. But when Sabbatai Zevi rose to prominence, some of the Adamites traveled to join him, you see. So due to this sect, Adam became a popular name in England. So isn't that fascinating? That Adam became popular not through the Old Testament, but through Sabbatai Zevi in the 1700s. That's quite incredible, isn't it? That's why Adam became a popular name, because of the Adamites. And also, of course, they were massive in Scotland. I would say they were probably bigger in Scotland than in England. So Joseph Wolf, he was known as the English dervish among the Muslims, and he often got out of dangerous situations by stripping naked and walking away in accord with the Adamite tradition. So there you go, Joseph Wolf. Adam Baal Shem Tov, the son of Rabbi Elijah, the founder of the Nistorim, he took the name of Adam Wolfson. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because they all changed their names. And we found that with the royal families through Europe, because a lot of them got very into Kabbalah and probably into Frankism, because there was a lot of princes in royalty who were very taken in by this cult. So that's why a lot of them had all these different titles, like Second Duke of Hanover and all. You'd find they have all these different titles. And it was impossible, really, later to find out whether they actually were these titles, because they had so many of them. And this was, of course, a way to, sorry, just knocked something off there. This was, of course, a way to actually hide their own tracks. So, yes, they expected the Mosaic to come forth from this lineage descended from Sabbatai Zevi. And in England, Adam Wolfson married Elizabeth Ferdinando, the granddaughter of Joseph Lombroso's son. So he was another Sabbatean, you see. Can you see how the infiltration works? Adam and Elizabeth later went to Scotland. One of the sons of this marriage was named Adam Wilson. That's the one I was talking about. Adam Wilson, in the expectation that he could be the promised one. So they were looking for messiahs all over the place. So Adam Wilson, yes, Scottish Freemasonry. This is where it all joins together. Adam Wilson was a key figure, not only with the Adamites, but the Sabbateans. And of course, he came from Sabbatai Zevi's own heritage. Adam Wolfson descended from Sabbatai Zevi and a lineage of rabbis. So Adam Wilson, Scottish Freemasonry ties into the crypto Jews of Scotland. Adam Wilson, son of Adam Wolfson, was involved with influencing the early Scottish Freemasonries, and Sabbatai Zevi had undergone conversion to Islam in order to save his life, remember. And it was also, this is very important, to reunite the lost sparks of truth in Islam. So you can see that they didn't just hide behind a religion. This is a really important point. They didn't just hide behind the religion. They became part of it. Like with Catholicism, as in Jacob Frank, being able to see the divine presence in the Eucharist. So Wilson had followers in the Christian world, and they often assumed the outward sign of conversion to Christianity while maintaining their secret Kabbalistic and Jewish traditions. So a descendant of Adam Wilson was John Wilson, founder of the British Israel movement. There you go. Can you see how it's all coming together? So Adam Wilson, obviously descendant of Sabbatai Zevi through a rabbinical bloodline, was the descendant with John Wilson, founder of the British Israel movement, he was born in 1788, the son of John Wilson of Kilmarnock, Ayr, who was the grandson of Adam Wilson, or previously Adam Wolfson. John Wilson was a friend of the Anglican Bishop Solomon Alexander of Jerusalem, a Hebrew Christian. Could have been a Sabbatean, you see. Bishop Alexander was a former rabbi born in Poland. If he was in Poland, there's a very good chance he was a Frankist, the son of a rabbi from England, and he was ordained by George Murray, Bishop of Rochester, Bishop Blomfield of London, and Bishop Selwyn of New Zealand. I've looked all these people up, by the way, and it's all absolutely spot on. After attaining his experience of Ruach HaKadosh, the Holy Spirit, Adam Wilson was led to the secret Scottish branch of the Nistorim. Adam Wilson was also a supporter of the Stuart dynasty and a Jacobite. So this is very interesting when we're talking about Scotland and Israel. It really starts to come together as to why the Scottish Rite is so important and how important Scotland has been through these movements. Yes, Adam Wilson was a friend and associate of Lord Kilmarnock of the 4th Earl of Kilmarnock, who was actually executed in 1746 after the last Jacobite rebellion. Lord Kilmarnock became the Grand Master of Scottish Freemasonry in 1742. Lord Kilmarnock's son, the Earl of Errol, changed the family surname from Boyd to Hay. So the Hays, the Hay, they were very influential in Freemasonry, along with the Drummonds. Look up the Drummonds as well. Adam Wilson's first wife was Jeanette, which means it's that's Janet with 2 N's, also meaning light in Hebrew. His second wife was Janet Taylor. Both wives were of Jewish origin, you see. So these are cryptos. These are people who are masquerading under different names or changing their names to suit their surroundings. So yes, I'm going to quote now from something called Jewish to Polishness, a preliminary investigation by Abraham G. Duker. And the article is actually called From Kabbalistic Judaism to Roman Catholicism and from Jewishness to Polishness. Long title, isn't it? I'll read that again for you. From Kabbalistic Judaism to Roman Catholicism and from Jewishness to Polishness, a preliminary investigation by Abraham G. Duker. The assumption of the sex continuity is demonstrated in a brochure published in 1820, in which the fear is expressed that the several million Jews, together with the neophytes, might rise in a revolution with the appearance of a Jew or convert endowed with great genius. Isn't that interesting? So they were talking about a Sabbatai Zevi or a Jacob Frank or even an Ava Frank, which of course was Jacob Frank's daughter. So it says this fear of a Jewish convert plot has been a recurrent motive in Polish and classical literature. Peter Beer stated in 1822 that the Frankists continued to maintain a recruiting station in Warsaw. Tsar Alexander I viewed them as a separate group in the 1820s. This indicated in the reports that he actually wrote down, and he had a spy known as Macrot who was looking out for these underground Sabbatean groups. That's Tsar Alexander I. So take a look also at They Warned You, the Irish Count. So Shekinah, the Virgin Mary and the Song of Songs, reflections on a Kabbalistic symbol in its historical context. That's the title of another thing that I'm reading out from. It was published online by Cambridge University Press, 20th September 2002 by Arthur Green. It's not that interesting, but there's a couple of good lines in I'm going to read out. So it's Shekinah, the Virgin Mary and the Song of Songs. Shekinah in the Kabbalah of the 13th century is a Jewish response to and adaptation of the revival of devotion to Mary in the 12th century Western Church. So the integration of Frankism into Catholicism came through devotion to Mary as the divine Shekinah. So I'm now going to read out something from a book which I've read, and I read again quite recently, and it's an analysis of the effect that Kabbalah had on Christianity. Written by Bernard Pick, published in 1913, he states, Kabbalah and its influence on Christianity gives the whole system a thorough examination in his book, and the conclusions are the same as anyone basically who's objectively studied it. He quotes a professor who was well regarded at the time, Professor Wunsch. And this is what Professor Wunsch had to say about Kabbalah. By making the Bible a textbook to elicit deeper ideas, the greatest nonsense and rubbish came to light. The so-called hidden mysteries and revelations were nothing but fancies whirling in the heads of the Kabbalists. Very well said. It is also clear that the literature of the Kabbalah clearly proves that its representatives had completely lost the sense for a suitable understanding of the words of Scripture. Now, that is it in a nutshell, because what the Zohar does is it takes ideas from the Bible and brings them into this fantasy world of the Kabbalists. So the Kabbalists that originated in the Languedoc in the 13th century spread their fantasies and disruption through the fake messiahs, Sabbatai Zevi, and later through Jacob Frank to the Christian world and beyond. That's a quote from my article, by the way. And if you go to Clowns of Kabbalah at windowsontheworld.net, you'll find lots of links, potted histories there, which you can use as a springboard for even more research. So the results of this can be seen, of course, in Rosicrucian Freemasonry and even in the warped thinking of the New Age and the language of the present times. And at this point, I'm going to just check how long I've been going for. I've been going for 50 minutes, so I'm going to round this up as part one. But I hope you're finding this as fascinating as I am. I find it really interesting because it's hidden, but it's not secret. You can find this stuff out by just going to the right sources. It's all there. And the influence on Britain, Ireland particularly, through the Marian cult of Miriam HaKadosh is huge. So when people saw those Mary statues outside the church, the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits were complicit with the Sabbatean Frankists for putting Mary there as an idol when she was never an idol in Christianity. So this cult of Mary was Miriam HaKadosha, the divine light of the Shekinah. So that's something to think about, and maybe to get back, if you're a Christian, to the true Christianity. And I'll leave it there for this particular episode. Thanks for all the comments. And yes, check out the website. I think over the next couple of days, I'm going to put up a notice, maybe tomorrow or the next day, for part two, because I don't know about you, but I'm finding this really interesting, and it's bringing up all the stuff that I've already researched. And as I'm doing it live, it's all coming together. So to me, it's a bit of a treat as well. Hope you enjoyed that. And I'm going to check the messages. And yes, support the show if you can. You can do that at the homepage of Windows on the World, or email me at info@windowsontheworld.net. So thanks a lot, and see you all soon.